out. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com podcast. This is episode number 8. This week is a very special week. We are going to be discussing the music industry, life as a touring musician, and how to make money in your home studio with my good buddy and Nashville session drummer, Tim Buell. Now, Tim's been in the music business for a long time. He's done it all, from traveling all over the world to working at home and offering services in his home studio. Tim's got a lot of great information. He's a great guy. And this is an episode where you definitely want to take some notes and listen up, especially if you're a home studio owner and you're looking to get started and make some money and growing your brand. So let's talk with Tim right here on the HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com podcast. All right, well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Home Recording Made Easy podcast. This is episode 8, and this week is a special week because we have my good buddy, Tim Buell. Now, Tim's a drummer out of Nashville, Tennessee, and we're going to talk a little bit about his career, how he got into the music business, what he does for a living, and then also talk a little bit about how you have different revenue streams to kind of make a living in today's music industry, which we've talked about on prior podcasts. So, Tim, thanks so much for hanging out with me and taking some time because I know you're busy.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me. Today the nice thing about working from home from the studio is, as opposed to like the touring I used to do, is today I went for a walk with my wife this morning, and then I was like, man, I'm going to clean the cars, I'm going to sweep the garage. I usually like am working from 6 in the morning until 5 or whatever. And today I was like, you know what? I'm not, other than this interview, I was like, I'm not going to work today, which means I'll probably work sometime over the weekend, but that's kind of nice to mix it up. That
is, and that's part of what we talk about. A lot of my students, a lot of my followers, there's a very good percentage. I say about 20% of them email me all the time talking about, hey, I'm either about to retire or I'm about to leave my job, or unfortunately I just lost my job and I've been doing the music thing for X amount of years, whether it's a musician, whether it's a part-time engineer, whether it's both. And they follow folks like you on YouTube. They follow folks like me, and they want to get into this end of the business, and they don't know how to start. And they want to talk about, well, how do we get into this? What do we do? How easy is it? How long does it take to actually make any money? I want to have that flexibility to be able to say, hey, it's Friday, and I don't feel like doing a lot of work today. And so I know that is a huge topic and a lot of unpacking to do there. And I want to ask you a little bit about that because I know you do like what I do. You work from home and you have your own gig, and it's great. And it didn't happen overnight. I know that. So, But first I want to talk a little bit about how we met, because in last week's episode on the podcast, the topic was investing in your craft. And it's something I talk about to my students all the time, which is you have to invest in yourself to get better at what you do, whether it's a musician playing an instrument like drums or guitar, or whether it's being an audio engineer and learning and taking courses and training yourself. And even if you are a teacher like you are and I am, doesn't mean that we don't continue to train and continue to learn and get better. And the way we had met was, and I mentioned this in some of my YouTube videos when we talked about my live streaming and my Ableton backing tracks was, and I told my audience before that I actually wanted to learn Ableton Live. And so I knew nothing about Ableton Live and how to use it as far as live performance was concerned. I'm a Pro Tools Studio One guy, but all the cats that play live and play the backing tracks play with Ableton. So I got on YouTube and did some searching, and one of your videos came up. I forget which one it was, but I think it was the one where you showed how to have a Midi command to stop the playhead. So between songs, you don't have to hit a space bar or hit a pad that the song stops. And I thought, I never even would have thought of that. So that's a hell of a thing.
And neither would I, by the way, if someone hadn't shown me.
That was beautiful. I said, oh yeah, I'm going to need to learn how to do that. So I looked in the description box of the YouTube video, and you offered a course on Ableton Live. And I purchased that course, and you taught me a ton. And I want to let everyone know that if you're into doing Ableton Live and running tracks, in the show notes below, we'll leave the link to your course that I highly recommend you go check out his course. But his course was really detailed, very thorough, much like a lot of my courses. And I thought it was really well put together. And I reached out to Tim and said, hey, I teach too, but I teach audio engineering. You teach how to use Ableton Live and drum lessons and such. We should chat, and just from one instructor to another. And that's how we kind of embarked on this friendship, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it just goes to show, you need to invest in yourself. So even if you are a seasoned musician or a seasoned instructor, it's always good to continue to try to get better at what you do, because you never know what you're going to learn and who you're going to meet. And so I think thought that was really interesting. And so
yeah,
you're right.
Absolutely. Like, I love that you're talking about the aspect of investing in yourself, in that you always need to be learning. I think that a lot of people, in Nashville, it's so interesting. Like, I work with a lot of producers that are like, oh man, the tracking I do is going to sound so much better because I'm going to get these preamps, or the
Right.
XYZ I'm going to do. Like, I just got this new vocal mic. It's going to be amazing. And it's like, well, that's one form of investing in your business and yourself, which I actually just did. We've actually talked back and forth. I finally placed my order and ordered like
Your
literally
studio
the biggest studio
Nice.
rehaul I've ever done. Bought
Awesome.
a bunch of new preamps, bunch of stuff. But that's one form of investing in yourself that I think too many people focus on, is like, oh, I got to buy the next thing to upgrade this thing and that'll sound better, when really, there's a lot of, case in point, I have every track I've ever sent out to someone that I've recorded on, every podcast anyone's ever heard by me, every YouTube video I've ever filmed has been recorded on a 2009 MacBook Pro.
There you go. Yep.
With 8 gigs of RAM and a solid state drive inside that I swapped out myself. And I've had the same interface, the Focusrite Sapphire Pro 40, for like 10 years. And I have piggybacked, I have a Sapphire Pro 24, and that has been, there are a lot of people that have better gear than me that don't get as good of drum sounds as me, because they've put most of the focus on, I need the gear, not how can I get better at striking a drum or tuning a drum or placing a mic.
Right.
Of course, there are a lot of people that have better preamps than me that get way better drum sounds than me too.
Right. Right. But the greatest preamp in front of a musician or an engineer that doesn't know how to use it properly is not nearly as good as someone that knows how to use the gear properly and may have a less expensive piece of equipment. And I talk a lot about that here. We talk a lot about with studio gear and plugins is always the topic on my channel, is that magic plugin that's going to change the game, and it only changes the game if you really know what you're doing. And so like you, I kind of preach, use your stock plugins that came with Pro Tools or Cubase or Studio One or Logic or GarageBand or whatever you use, and wait until you can get a great recording and a great mix with those. And then when you say, I've taken this about as far as I can take, and now I just want to go another 20%, well, that's when we can start looking at all those other different tools to maybe enhance what you've already learned how to do. But that in of itself, I tell people, don't buy another plugin. If you don't know how to use a compressor, for example, stop buying plugins and go buy my course, Compression Made Easy, first. Spend that $20 or $30, whatever I charge for it these days, and don't buy the $50 plugin, because that plugin is useless to you if you don't understand how to use a compressor, right?
Yeah, and I stress so much that if you're looking at music, whether it's the audio side or the player side or whatever, or both, I do a lot of both these days. But no matter what you're doing, I think not enough people are looking at you can go on YouTube, and anything that is in one of your courses you can find on YouTube.
That's right.
I couldn't do it in 5 minutes maybe, but I can probably find everything you talk about. Same with my Ableton course. There's probably, spread out across YouTube, there are probably every single thing I talk about in that course. But I think what a lot of my friends do is, who are musicians who want to get into recording, who want to get into backing tracks, they look at, it's a $100 course, it's a $200 course, and they think, I can't afford that. Or more than likely, they're like, I'll go find it on YouTube, because it's out there. And it's, yes, but how much time are you going to waste surfing YouTube? And that was me. The reason I made a course about Ableton is because I tried to learn it on YouTube, and it took me hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to do it poorly, and just kind of get up and running. And then I did that for a year and was just kind of like, with chewing gum and duct tape, getting my track sessions to work through gigs and stuff. And then I had a friend of mine who I subbed for on a gig. He pulled up his Ableton and was like, let me break down how I have the session laid out. And I was like, whoa, what? And it blew my mind, because I was like, oh, that's so much easier than what I do. That's way better than what I do. Oh my gosh, this is so much better than what I do. And it was like, man, I wish that I had just up front paid $100, $200 for this course. It pays for itself the first time you put it to use. And then after that, your life is way better and you saved so much time.
Right. Well, that's it. Time, right? So what is your hourly, what are you worth per hour, right? Right. So you can spend 50 hours on YouTube looking for this stuff. What do you really make in an hour? What could you be saving in money if you were to just get the course from someone that knows what they're doing the first time?
That is something that I've had the conversation with. So, because I, like you, I get a lot of people that are maybe studying music in school and they're about to graduate from college, or people that just moved to Nashville. They'll look me up and say like, what should I charge for a session? Or I do a lot of transcribing too. So they'll say, oh, what should I charge for a transcription? And that's going to be different for everyone, because just like you said, what is your time worth?
Right.
And I think as musicians, it's interesting in Nashville, there's kind of like an accepted show pay that it's like, oh yeah, good artists pay this, mid-level artists pay this. And then like, the bar bands that are just out there, like Weekend Warrior doing it, like they pay this.
Right.
And it's like, who decided what?
Where'd the numbers come from, right?
Yeah, and the same with people that want to get into session work at home. Like, I have a lot of people that are like, well, what do you charge for a session? And I'm always like, well, like you think of it, because people think like, oh man, you should get $200 for a session. You should get $500 for a session. You should get, and it's like, just break down what your time is worth. If you can send me a song and I can track drums on it in an hour, all we're talking about is an hour.
Right.
So just because someone in your, a musician in your circle of influence says, oh, you need to charge XYZ for your session, it's like, well, I work a coffee shop job and I make $10 an hour, and this session wants to pay me $20 and I can probably do it in an hour. You're making double what you make at your coffee job by just knocking it out in an hour. So sure, most people might say $20 for a session. You're crazy. You're way undercharging. And certainly, if you're doing enough sessions and you have spend all this gear, like,
yep.
But the price is the point is the price is always going to be different for people. And I just meet so many musicians that are like, oh man, I got this awesome gig. It pays $500. And I'm like, oh, where's the gig? They're like, it's LA. We're flying out there. We're out there for 2 days. Then we play the show and then we're busing back. And it's like, hold on.
Yeah, that's it, right. From Nashville to LA, right, on a bus.
Yeah, right. Right. I'm like, hold the phone here.
Right.
Like, so you're spending like 5-6 days doing this one show. Like, sure, the show pay might be cool, but like,
right.
Do the math about the surrounding stuff. You could pay 3 shows in town in those same days, and they could all pay you $100, and you're making way more for your time. So it's really not like, I just think so many musicians, so many creatives don't really put a value on, okay, this is how much my hour is worth. And then everything just gets so much clearer, and then you don't have to be bitter about, because I meet a lot of musicians too that are like, man, I played this gig and they treated us poorly and it took so much time. And I'm like, well, like, sometimes that, like, I mean, everybody has those experiences, but It's like, man, if you knew what your hourly rate was, you could have, before agreeing, you could have said, hey, how many songs is it? Is there a rehearsal? Is there this? Is there this? Where's the show? And then you could say, okay, I'm looking at the math, and with this many hours, there's just no way this makes sense for me to play for this amount of money.
Right.
And then you're able to respectfully say to whoever's asking you, hey, thank you so much. This is not the right fit for me, just with, the budget you have. So love to work something out in the future, but this one isn't right for me. And it gives you such a better filter for, you being able to grow your business and operate your business without getting bitter or burnt out, because you're able to just say, no, I need X dollars per hour, so this isn't going to be that.
Right. And then some of it's also supply and demand, right? And then also your skill set and what you bring to the table too. So that's part of the other part of the equation. Maybe as a musician, which we'll talk about in a minute, where like we talked last time when I was on your podcast, that when you're at a level playing sessions and playing on the road, someone at your level, it's a given that you can play. And we're not talking about someone who just sat behind the drum kit 2 weeks ago. We can play. There's going to be people that you're better than, and there's going to be people that are better than you, but you're good enough to fill the requirements of the playing ability that needs to be there. Right. But in the engineering world, and same thing in the engineering world, where how much you should charge to mix a song, which is the number one question that I get, it has to do with, well, how in demand are you? What kind of work can you turn out? and what's the budget and how long is it going to take you to do, and everything that you just said kind of determines, and every project's going to be a little different. It's not going to be a set price every single time. It can be if you're that good, and you're mixing, 5 records a week. Well, then you can almost charge whatever you want if the phone doesn't stop ringing. You must be very good. But for most of us, that's not always the case, and so you have to be sensible, right?
Yeah.
So
I think it's really important in that. This is probably the thing I'm most guilty of when I transitioned from touring full time to working from my studio and all that stuff. Like, at first I was just like hoping that I could find the work to do.
Right, gotta do something.
And now,
right.
several years later,
right.
I'm super busy, and
right.
I have to be really protective over. Yes, I should do this thing, and no, I should not do this thing, or just having to be a little picky about starting projects, because if I start projects, it means I can't start other things and all of that stuff. The way that I try to balance myself, because then it can sometimes just become I'm working and I'm working and I'm working and I'm working, and that's great, and the money's there and it's all great. But then you start realizing, oh wow, I got into music because I love music and I love being creative, and I like working with people, and at the end of the day, regardless of money, there are projects my favorite band that I ever toured with was the band that I made the least amount of money with.
But you had the most amount of fun, good people, and good tunes and those things.
Yeah, you always have to keep that balance of, at the end of the day, I am a creative. So yes, I want to make a business. I want to support my family. I want to do all that. I want to have job security, all this stuff.
Yeah.
But also, it's like you're saying, you can't just say, well, I charge this much per song and this is what I charge. Because sometimes someone calls you, like I'll have producer buddies of mine, they're like, dude, I have no budget at all, but this artist, like the song is super cool and it's right up your alley because I know you like to play this stuff. Like, do you want to do it? I'm like, sure.
Right.
And then they'll like bring a 6-pack over to the session and we play and then we hang out after, and it's like, okay, great.
Right. And you help somebody out, and
yeah, and you look at, sure, that 3 hours that we spent hanging out making that song or whatever, like, no, I could have made so much more if I had, blah, 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 but I made songs that I was like, oh yeah, it was fun and it was cool. So like, it is a balancing act, and it's not just, it can be easy for me, who's very much like, make a to-do list, show up to work at 6 and clock out at this time every day, because I need that structure. And to-do lists are the way I do it, and making sure that I have it, because a lot of people that work from home might know, or everybody's been working from home more, like some people like it more than others. I personally love it, but I have to make sure that like I'm essentially, air quotes, clocking in at a certain time, working, and then clocking out at a certain time.
That's right.
Otherwise, it all just like blends together and you're not getting as much done. It gets confusing, but it's always important to keep that balance. Like at the end of the day, we're making music. And music should, when it's, at its highest level, it should make us feel something.
Yep.
And sometimes there's not any amount of money in the world that makes me want to, that's not the only driving factor.
Right.
But it's hard to keep it in balance.
Sure. And you said something, you made a key point, which will make sure people didn't miss. You said years later, you're at the point now where you're making money and you have passive income, and now you can maybe be a little bit more picky about what you want to do versus what do I need to do. I need to feed my wife, I need to put food on the table. But, after a few years of being successful in business, you may have all that covered. And now it's like, okay, well, what do I want to do? Because I'm not desperate anymore. I don't need to make money. And we talk about that on the podcast. Another upcoming episode is called We Love Our Day Jobs. And there's a whole thing about day jobs and not just jumping into the deep end of the pool and building it up and taking time and all of that. But I want to talk to you. So you said a little bit about touring. You mentioned some things I want to talk to you about. So first I wanted to tell us a little bit about when you started playing and when did you really get into the music industry? How did that really happen for you? I'm sure you started at a young age playing if your instruments, like most people that get to the level that you're at. But at what point did you start getting into the music industry? What made you want to do that for a living as opposed to just go get a job that pays a lot of money,
So, and fear not, anyone who's listening who's like, oh God, the backstory. I hate backstories too, especially if it's someone I don't know.
It could be brief. So, it could be brief.
Yeah. So started playing when I was 10, taught myself for a while, then got private lessons from an amazing, his name's Travis Thompson. I will forever be grateful for, I think a lot of people, well, education is so important, even if it's for the 10-year-olds that are just starting and stuff. Like, without such a great drum teacher as my first teacher, I would not be doing music as a career. So, studied privately with a teacher, and then I got into high school, and I was like, man, I think this seems like the only thing I want to do with my life.
Right.
So that's when I went to Belmont University in Nashville. I graduated high school, went to Belmont, did a 4-year program, got a degree in commercial drum set performance with an emphasis on like commercial music. Or I don't know what.
Wow.
I don't even know what my degree
That's
was.
a degree?
Essentially,
That was a degree, huh?
yeah. So the reason I picked Belmont, and for anyone that's thinking about should I maybe go to college for music or whatever, the reason I picked Belmont was twofold. One, they had a commercial program for drums, not a jazz program, not a classical program, which most music schools offer jazz or classical.
Okay.
Belmont, like Berklee College of Music and Musicians Institute and Belmont, are some of the few, that's not all of them, but those are some of the ones that stand out as programs that are offering more than just jazz or classical. The other reason I picked it is because I toured Berklee and I toured some other schools, and it just made sense to me that Belmont being in Nashville was like a good idea. And that was it. To me, that turned out to be very much the right idea because studying for 4 years at Belmont, like I absolutely learned drums and music and certain things that I would not know if I hadn't gone to music school. But hands down, the most valuable part of going to college for music was the people I met and the fact that I had 4 years in Nashville to, kind of put down roots, get out there and gig, and I didn't have to worry about, like, how much does this gig pay? Oh, it only pays $15. It's like, well, okay, great. I'm here to get better and study music and whatever. I'll go do this gig. Whereas now, someone's like, dude, I got $15 for you to play the show. And I'm like, what? Okay. That there's no math where that makes sense for me now, but then it didn't matter.
Right.
So all through college, I was studying and doing that whole thing, but I was also on the weekends, I would go out with different artists that were from Nashville. I was fortunate to kind of start touring on and off when I was in school, which some people, it takes them a while even after they graduate, and I just got lucky. The people I met, passed my name along, and so that's when I guess my professional career really started, was sometime in college. But when I graduated, I went full-time with this band, Remedy Drive. I toured with them for 2 years. We played all over the world. That's the band that I recorded my first feature album. I was the drummer, writing all the parts and doing the thing.
Wow.
And that was great. And then from Remedy, I played with a couple other like CCM artists, and then I, played with a lot of country artists like Gloriana, Jana Kramer, Jared Neiman, different people, like tons of artists from Nashville. And then I kind of reached a point where touring just seemed a little... so there's this balance of, you have the money the gig pays, you have the people that are on the gig, and then you have the music.
Right.
And I had a lot of teachers talk to me about, there has to be a balance of those three things for the gig to make sense. Just like we were talking about. It's not like every project I record on now has a set fee. It's like, well, is the music great? Do I love working with this person? Well, then the money situation is different. So it just got to me where there was no equation where the amount of money they could pay me would be worth like leaving my family, especially when the music, and it's not that the people were bad or whatever, it's just like they were co-workers.
Sure.
They weren't it wasn't a band of brothers taking the nation by storm. I was a hired gun, just showing up. And I had experience, like I was out with a major label artist that we woke up one morning and the monitor engineer was like, "Oh man, isn't it crazy? It's our last show." And I was like, "What was that?" "It's our what?" And he was like, "Yeah, I mean, it's the last show today. Isn't that crazy?" And I was just like, "What are you talking about?" He was like, "Oh yeah, like this is their last show. They're not going to exist after today." So I experienced enough of that to know, and I had started tour managing and doing some of the things that, like you're saying, how much value do you bring to a situation?
Sure.
And for me, I was starting to realize, wow, okay, I'm good enough at drums to play any of the gigs I've been hired to do, but I have these other skills. Like, I'm pretty good at like getting on the phone and advancing shows, or I'm pretty good at like answering emails. I can manage a calendar. I can do these things. And it just started to, when I started making like double show pay for tour managing or whatever, I was like, man, if I'm using all these skills to build someone else's business, I could probably do it for myself.
There you go.
And I would have a lot more security. I would be able to take the day and wash the cars and not have to worry
Sure.
about work. I would have a lot more control and flexibility.
Right.
So that's when I kind of made the very conscious decision. I took a year where I said, I'm not gonna tour for a whole year. And that was like the scariest year of my life because it's all I've done
Right.
for my whole
Money. How do you get paid? Right. That's what you're thinking to
Yeah.
yourself, right?
But the whole time I had been touring, I had been dabbling in education. I had been doing like master classes here and there, and I always had a website that I was, posting transcriptions to or kind of thoughts on this topic or that topic, and I always just kind of had a little bit of that cooking in the background. Mm-hmm. And that's what I stress to so many of my friends is the moment that you need to rely on a new way of finding income is really stressful, and having to create it out of nothing will make it almost impossible.
Right.
So the benefit of all of the, I'd do transcriptions here or there. Someone would find my website and say, hey, can you transcribe this for me? And I'd say, sure. And I'd charge like $20 for it. And I was like, no, cool. Like, nice little $20 I made while I was on the bus in the back lounge or whatever.
Right.
But that became really significant when I decided that I maybe wanted to not tour as much as I was doing at that time, because I was able to say, okay, I've already been transcribing for people. How can I like ramp this up? And ramping something up is so much easier than the moment I decide I maybe don't want to tour for the rest of my life, trying to find out how to build a website, trying to find out what kind of income streams I could make. Like, having that stuff just kind of simmering in the background meant that the moment I needed to really deploy them, they were much more, they were right at my fingertips. And like, sure, the first like year especially, I was cold emailing people and like, hey, do you need me to transcribe that? Hey, do you need help with this? Like, hey,
I remember those days. Those days.
So certainly, but the first year that I was not on the road, I think I matched the income I had ever made, like the most money I'd ever made touring full time. I matched that income the first year.
Wow.
And then since then, it's always been growth.
Some growth, no matter what. Right.
So I can't promise that's going to happen forever, but even if it doesn't, I'm at the point now where I have just so much more control that I just know how I can expect. Like, to me, it's just so crazy to me that I can look at, like, if my wife and I want to go on a vacation, I can look at my calendar and say, oh, yeah, September such and such, great, we'll go. Because touring, that was never the case. It was like,
Sure.
oh, I don't know. That's like right at the end of festival season. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, like...
You might get a call. And so part of that is, too, right, because you were a hired gun, you were a hired hand, so you're always looking or hoping for the next job to come along, because you're working for someone else, in essence. Right. So going on tour, and one of my questions, you kind of answer, like, what being as a touring musician, what you have some things that are probably really great, and I think a lot of those things are probably the things we would all think. You're touring, you're on a bus, you're a rock star, you're seeing different people, you're hanging out with the boys, and you're doing all that stuff. I'm sure there's a lot of fun that goes on there. But then the other part of it is, you're away from your family, right?
Yes.
It's a lot of long nights on that bus, sleeping in different beds every single night. That's got to get monotonous as all hell after a while. And then not always knowing where the next job's going to come from, right? So you come home and can't go on vacation during festival season, because what if I get that call? It's going to pay us, enough money to sustain us for the next 6 months, and we're on a beach somewhere, and I missed that opportunity, and that artist won't call me back again. Yeah. Right. So you decided to get off the road and to do your own thing. You're in a lot more control now over what you want to do.
Absolutely. And it got really frustrating, just always, like, I have so many musician friends that their attention span in a conversation is so terrible because they're so programmed that because and this is never the way that when I was band leading, this is not the way I think it should be done. But it is very frequent that a band leader is like, oh man, we need a guitar player for this run coming up. And they copy and paste the text to like 10 different guitar players.
Oh,
and
no kidding.
Pretty much like, it's Nashville, and like chances are if you're texting them, that those people are people that are qualified.
They can play
do the job or whatever. So usually like kind of whoever gets back to you for, like, you maybe have one or two people that you'll prioritize, but like kind of whoever gets back to you first, that you're like, okay, this is the person. So there were so many times where I just didn't want that to be. I was never very good at that anyway. Like, I have friends that are on the road, and then they're having their artist fly them from this show to this show so that they can be at this other artist show, and then they're renting a van and driving because the rental will, even though they have to pay for the rental themselves, like it works itself out because they're able to play this show. And I was just like, man, that is crazy. Like, there's just got to be an easier way to me. I just got to the conclusion of, man, there's got to be an easier way for me to make money than have to travel hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles to do it, especially if I'm traveling those 100 miles for someone else's business.
Right. If it was your business, right? If it was Tim's band, you were the main, you were the main rock star. Maybe that's different. Making all the money.
If it were my band, I would want, for the people that I worked with, I would want some level of. I just think like, most musicians don't, and it's interesting in Nashville, like most musicians don't really know anything about their business, because the Nashville model, if you're doing music on any scale, like the Nashville model is, okay, you probably have a publishing deal, you're writing for some people, then maybe, you start to cut your own stuff, and then you get a manager, then you get a booking agent, then you get all this stuff, then maybe you sign to a label. And it's like, before you even really had a business, there were people that took you under their wing and started helping you with these things, that it's like I can't imagine, I edit all my own video.
Right.
So I can't imagine hiring someone
to do that,
to edit video before I had ever done it. And there's varying degrees to that, but it's like, if you don't know anything about the job you're hiring for someone for, like, then why are you hiring them? And it's like, it's just so interesting to work for different artists where it's kind of like, okay, so you have a manager, and then you have, like an assistant, and then you have a tour manager who also does a lot of stuff and what are you doing all day?
Right. Well, and you have to pay all those people too, right? So it's, you have to, so at the end, that all comes out of your end, whatever your end is, right? And so, what, I guess that kind of leads into my next question. When you went on your own, and you left your day job touring, let's say, and you started off on this new business, even though there had some things kind of started cooking in the background, but you were still starting from pretty much the ground floor when you went totally by yourself, right?
Definitely.
What did you find the most difficult thing outside, making money, sure, but what was the most difficult thing for you do you think, when you first got started, that you said, wow, this was a little bit more challenging than I thought it was, or I didn't think of that, where that kind of took me by surprise? Was there anything? Or was it just because you said you made a lot of the money back, or you matched your income in the first year, which is great. Now, I think part of that's probably because of all the connections you had in the music business. Plus, you had stuff kind of going on in the background. So it wasn't like the first day off the road, you were sitting in your room going, hey, what do I think I want to do? You kind of knew what you wanted to do. You just needed to now start ramping it up and scaling it, right?
Yeah. I would say, I guess I don't know if anything surprised me or anything like that. I guess what I will say is, like, I had no idea how to sell things. I'm always constantly learning more about marketing, and the reason that I had so much to learn in that area is because I think, so much of the selling that goes on online is it's just terrible. Like, it's just buy my product.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of like marketing gimmicks and tricks and all this stuff. And so when I started to think more about my brand, in air quotes or whatever, and I needed to sell things to make a living or whatever, I was very resistant to playing all those gimmicky tricks and being sleazy.
Yep.
which just meant basically I would make like one post about something and be like, please buy this, and then no one would.
Right.
So I was like, okay, this is not working either.
Right.
How can I sell stuff and not feel sleazy about it? And I think it's something that you're doing. It's something that like I work a bunch with a ton of different online creators, and all of the people that I love what they're doing. The thing they're doing is providing value for people. And if that is your main thing, then any selling you do, any whatever you do is always going to be coming from the right place, and chances are it will be avoiding any of this sleazy, gimmicky, salesy thing, because the goal is I want to provide value for people.
Right.
So that was something that I had to learn, though. How can I provide value for people while also still making a living myself? And how can I amass a following? How can I, and I'm not talking about millions and millions and millions. And that was a misunderstanding that I had, as I thought, well, if I'm going to do this for real, I need to get 1 million subscribers on YouTube and 1 million people on Instagram and whatever. And it's just not the case.
No, I thought the same thing. Right.
You can make a living with, 200 people that support you if they'll buy everything you put out.
That's right.
So I think for me, I just had to learn like what selling really was, and how that's not always tied to doing tricks and gimmicks to get 1 million followers or whatever. Because I have friends that have 2 million subscribers on YouTube and can barely make a living because they haven't figured out how to negotiate this whole what I put out for free, what I sell, how I connect those two things. So that's always something I'm learning more and more and more about, is how to do that better, how to provide value, and then find the people that need that thing that you're making. Because at the end of the day, that's what we all are hoping. Like, I made my Ableton course not to become this rich person that has an island and I have a yacht or whatever.
Right.
I wanted to solve the problem of people opening up Ableton and going, whoa, what is this? This looks like nothing I've ever seen before.
Right.
I wanted to solve that problem. So getting better at selling for me not only has the benefit of me making more money, but it is the ability for me to solve that problem of, I don't know how to use Ableton and I need to because I have a show next week.
Right.
So it's that finding those people that are experiencing the problem you're trying to solve. That's something I'm still learning every single day.
Yeah, and none of that, everything you just said, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, none of that has anything to do with making music. And a lot of people that get into this business, whether it's from a musician side or an engineering side, for me, I enjoy it. It's fun, but that's not the fun, sexy stuff. That's not sitting in front of a console and playing with a bunch of gear, or playing with, vintage drum kits in the studio and trying to get the perfect snare sound. None of that is what pays the bills.
Yeah.
Right. It's all this other stuff. And that's why they call it the music business. And I think a lot of musicians and a lot of folks that are not in the music industry, but are like part-timers, weekend warriors, or people who just have a love for it, but never had to rely on it to feed themselves because they always had a day job. They understand the music part of it usually fairly well, but they have absolutely no inclination of the word business. They almost forget it even says music business. They hear music and it's music, And what you find out is, when you do this long enough, you find out that more of your time is spent on the business side. Far more time of my time is spent on the business side than it is on the music side.
Yeah.
Except, when they see the YouTube video or they see your Ableton course, they see the finished product and they don't see the 6 months worth of business stuff you did before that to make that 3-hour course for someone.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, again, that course will be in the show notes below. And the one thing that is, because I was one of those guys that searched all over YouTube trying to figure out Ableton, and there is a lot of stuff on Ableton, but there wasn't anybody who made it from a musician's point of view and how you used it as a live performing musician. Mm-hmm. Most of the stuff on Ableton was about DJs and different things that really worked a little bit for what I wanted to do or what you were teaching, but didn't quite get you there. I was like, okay, but I have so many more questions. Where yours was like, look, if you're going to perform live to backing tracks, here's the deal. And it was like, wow, that was the first time I ever saw anything like that. And that's why I went out and said, got to have this. And it cut down 6 months worth of time I
Yeah,
learned in a week,
absolutely.
which would have took me, without a doubt, 6 months would have took me. I learned in a weekend, because once you've used one DAW, you use them all, and they just have to
Yeah.
tweak them around a little bit. But you showed all the shortcuts that I never would have figured out. Never in a million years I'd have figured out all that stuff on my own. So, if you're
Man,
someone,
you're so good at plugging that course.
No,
There's
it's
been
very,
so many
very-
organic
it's-
uses of that.
it's very good. So anyone that wants to learn Ableton, and I did post a bunch of YouTube videos showing how I was using Ableton, and all of Tim's links are in those YouTube description boxes, and we'll also put it in the show notes below, so someone can go check out the course, because I'm not going to create that course. Someone's already done it that's done a good job. Go support Tim and pick up the course. It's worth it, and I use it. And people ask, and I've gotten a lot of questions about it on my YouTube videos. People have asked me about, wow, you're doing this and that, and I want to do this. So hopefully they'll go your way. So what, for someone, again, we kind of really just kind of answered it, but maybe, again, the number one or number two question I get is about, I want to move into the music industry full time on some level. What advice for you? What advice do you have for them right out of the gate before you make that jump? Here's what you ought to consider, maybe first, second, third, or that kind of a thing before you make that jump. And I guess for everybody's situation will be different. Where are you in your life? Are you retiring?
Right.
Do you need the money? Is this just a passion? Are you out of a job? Depending on where you are, from someone who started from scratch, what would you say?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I would keep in mind. One, with whatever else you have going on in your life, I think that it's really hard to, the goal of I want to make a living being a musician is far too broad to ever achieve it.
Right.
So I really stress, similar to figure out what your time is worth, if you want to do music on a part-time or full-time basis, figure out what you need to do that. Because no one is going to set that price for you. If you go for a job interview at such and such corporation and they're offering a salary, like they're telling you what your time is worth and you're either agreeing to it or not,
Right.
whatever. As a musician, no one's going to do that. No one's going to say you should be making this much a year, which means this much a month, which means this much every 5 days of the work week or whatever. So sit down and say, if I'm going to do this full time, I know it's not going to be super easy, and I know that maybe the first couple of years I do it, I'm not going to be making what I am now at my job, but here's what we need to make. Now you have a goal you can work toward. Okay, every week I got to make this much from music. That is so I think first, if you're trying to make some transition or you're trying to just figure it out, get really concrete with, okay, how can I do that? And that takes kind of breaking things into smaller component parts than just, I want to transition from my job to being a musician.
Yeah.
or whatever.
What does that mean? Define what that really means, right?
Right.
What does that mean?
So, outside of that, I would say that, a lot of people are like, well, I want to make a living doing music. I'm going to move to Nashville or I'm going to move to LA.
Yeah, I wanted
And
to
my
talk to you
thing,
about that
before
too,
people, before people think about doing that, I would say, have you tapped out your area? So the chance of you, you have some kind of 9-to-5 job and you practice drums on the weekends sometimes and you had a band a couple years ago that doesn't play. The chance of you being able to play drums more, uprooting your life wherever you are, and then just moving to Nashville and hoping a gig falls out of the sky, it's just not how it works.
Right.
I would say before you ever think about moving, have you gigged in your hometown? Have you, opened up a, teaching studio and done that thing? Like, have you made some moves in your hometown to know that there's no way that you can make a living in that town, so you need to move somewhere
Right.
else? And that's going to look way different. Like if you're in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska or something, which I love Nebraska, but there are parts of it that are just cornfields for
Right.
miles and miles and miles and miles. So like it maybe you can't make any kind of full-time living if you're in Nebraska. Although the first band I toured with started in Nebraska, so I don't know. So maybe, but until you've done that work and said, I've tried to play with some bands, there's just no one that's consistent, and I've tried to do this thing, and until you've done that, there's almost no chance that you can move to Nashville. And now, because all that stuff is experience. Like I played in some bands in high school before I went to Belmont, and we played some gigs in the parking lot of a grocery store or whatever. None of it was like life changing.
Sure.
But I had its experience.
Right.
So when I first had a rehearsal as a professional musician in Nashville, I had been to hundreds of rehearsals playing with my band in high school and playing at these like churches or whatever I was doing. Like all of that is valid experience and will also tell you whether or not, it will also help you give yourself a filter. And I think that like if you're going to be a professional, you need to, it's not that you need to have a thick skin necessarily, but you need to be able to take criticism and learn from that. When I first started recording, I remember, I would do a pass of a song, and the producer would be like, "Hey, man, like really cool. The verse works, but and then he'd have like 20 different things that were terrible about what I played.
Right.
And I would instantly be like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? I mean, that groove in the second chorus is just kind of like that Jeff Porcaro thing, and then like the blah blah blah." It doesn't matter. One, the producer's the reason you're there, and he's hiring you to do it, so there you go.
Right.
But also, like, are you listening to the whole song, or are you just thinking about your drum part? And I think you just need to be able to, aside from how you feel or how you want something to be perceived, it could be that you, and the flip side, like you sound great in your local bands you're doing, and you move to Nashville, you get a gig, and you play your first Nashville gig. I think that you should be prepared to know that, like, pretty much anyone you encounter in Nashville, like, is a musician.
Right.
And it's probably pretty good. And people say that as a joke, but it's not really a joke. Like, my wife does not work in the music industry in any way, shape, or form, and has a classical voice degree and has an amazing voice and can harmonize better than half of the people I've been on the road, like, with BGVs on. So it's like, she's just out there, like, working a totally normal job.
Right.
Air quotes.
Right.
So, like, the level of, and I have a good mix engineer of mine who spent a lot of time in Houston and, like, working in the music scene in that area. He was an engineer in Nashville, worked in Texas, moved back to Nashville. And talking to him, he's like, yeah, there's just, like, Nashville's a different deal. There's just no place on planet Earth where there's this much of a concentrated group of people that are this good at this thing.
Right.
And that's not, I mean, there are a ton of terrible musicians in Nashville, too.
Sure.
It's not that they're all good.
Right.
But I think it's really important to prepare yourself to be very realistic about, okay, in my local scene, this is where I'm stacking up. So if I go to Nashville, this is where I'll stack up. And then the last thing is, I think the internet is so important. And it doesn't matter if you're 70 and you want to do some more music, or you're 14 and you're listening to this and you're thinking about dreaming about one day becoming a musician.
Right.
The internet is not going away.
Nope.
And regardless of how you feel about it or how you want the world to interact with the internet, here we are. The reason that I can exist and make a living is because of the internet.
Me too.
My connections in Nashville are amazing. Like, and I get a ton of work through the people I know from Nashville, but that would not be enough to make a full-time living doing what I'm doing alone, unless I had a website and I had an Instagram and a YouTube and a podcast and all these other things that, get me out there in the world and let people know, oh, wow, this guy knows about Ableton. Oh, wow, this guy, has a transcription of this person. Like, oh, wow. So the internet is so important, and you can just, I like to put this in front of people because a lot of people are like, I hate Facebook, I hate Instagram, I hate YouTube. It's all blah, blah, blah. For me, Instagram is amazing. YouTube is amazing. Podcast is amazing because it's a real-time document of where you were in your life then.
Sure.
Whatever you're using it for, I can go back 3 years on my YouTube videos and listen to the drum mixes I was doing for those videos and listen to the vocal mix I did on that video and go, wow, this is terrible.
Yeah, right.
And I'm sure in another 3 years, I'll look back at stuff I'm putting out right now in this moment and go, wow, this is terrible.
Yep.
But the amount of skills that you have to put out a great YouTube video is insane.
Yeah, it's
You have to know
unbelievable.
how to edit photos. You have to
Yeah.
know how to edit video. You have to know how to mix audio. You have to know how so many things. You have to know how to think about what people want. And we've talked about it before. Like,
Yeah.
I
learning it.
want to post a YouTube video about odd time signatures and drum soloing, and it turns out no one else cares about it. Because most people on planet Earth are like, I want to jam to AC/DC.
That's right.
So just that skill alone and how to get into the brain of the people you're trying to make content for is invaluable, whether it's your full-time gig or not. Every musician I know could benefit from the fact that, this is how other drummers think about drums and perceive drums, and this is how artists think about, and this is how engineers think about and perceive drummers and whatever. That's going to make you a better drummer. Period.
Absolutely.
And creating content helps you do that because you have to be involved with getting better at mixing, whatever. And there's so many, sure, there are a couple of staples of my business as it is now that make me the most money.
Mm-hmm.
But I do so many things that, I get paid randomly to do this kind of task here. And I get randomly, I mix YouTube videos for people because a lot of engineers that mix are way too expensive for someone trying to get a mix. But a lot of YouTube creators are terrible
Yes,
at
they
audio.
are. And that's more important than they say the audio is actually more important than the video quality of a YouTube video, which you would think, I would have thought that would be backwards.
Right.
But they say you could get away with kind of a shoddy video if the lighting's not right on your iPhone or whatever, and as long as you can distinguish what the hell's on the screen. But if it could be a 4K cinematic video, and if the audio sucks, no one's going to watch the video.
It's true. I mean, all the people that are helping me fix my car, I don't care that the iPhone is shaking as they're walking through. I just wish I could hear what they're saying.
Right, so I know how to fix the car. Right, It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense.
So to me, I'm at a price point, if you want to hire me to mix your YouTube video, I'm at a very unique price point because that's not what I do.
But you can do it well and you can do it affordably, right?
Right. So sure, if I try to take the world by storm and I'll mix your YouTube video, that's probably not how I can make a full-time living.
Right.
Or at least not right now, and I don't really want to. But it's a skill that I have, and it's a thing that I can add value to someone. So someone hires me to do drums, I'm not just going to track the drums here. I'm going to edit them. Right. I'm not just going to edit them, but I'm going to make sure when I send the files that everything is labeled very clearly. If there's a section where I feel like it could really use some programming, maybe they're hiring me to just track acoustic drums, but I doubt they would be upset if I sent them a couple stemmed out things that are programmed.
Sure.
If they don't use them, they don't use them.
They don't use them, but they have an option.
But they have an option, and certainly that's more than me, tracking some drums and saying, okay, here they are. The sounds are great, but you got to edit them. You got to, whatever. It's like the more you can bring to the table, just the better off you're going to be. So even if you are an engineer and you're mixing stuff, you notice that they have a podcast and you say, hey man, I could send you a template for your podcast that would make it just sound so much better, and then your client's like, whoa, that's amazing. Or you say, man, I see that you have a YouTube channel. I got a YouTube channel myself. Like, your thumbnails are kind of whack right now. I would love to send you, just an idea for this. And maybe they like it, maybe they don't. But it's about, and it's just fun to learn some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's the other thing. It's a pain at first, but like having multiple ways during your day where it's not just mix. You can break up mixing with, man, I'm going to edit this thumbnail. I'm going to edit this video.
Sure.
Like, I don't know, for me, I need
the variety.
Yeah, I
work.
need variety. Touring, the thing that bummed me out is I would love getting a new gig because it's like, okay, I'm going to learn the 30 songs, like, I'm going to nail this hour and a half set, whatever. And then 20 shows later, I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, now what? Right.
Everything is sounding awesome. It's great. Like, now I'm bored.
Right.
And that wasn't because of any of the particular artists I played for. That's just my brain. I'm like, okay, this is awesome. I don't want to do this for the next 7 years and play the same music. And sure, the show always grows, and you learn that you can steal a little fill here. That's the perfect spot for that. And oh man, the bass and drums could really do this here. You're making little incremental improvements, and that's cool and that's important. But for me, I was like, man, I want to do more than just drum all the time.
Right. So you have to be a driven person. I mean, that's the other thing, right? In order to be a business person and work for yourself and work from home and do everything that we're talking about. And in 1 second, because you're talking about multiple streams of income is really what you're talking about. And I want to talk about all the different things that you do so people know, if I go to Tim, he can do a whole bunch of things, but you have to be driven, right? Because it could be very easy working from home, sitting from home, never getting out of your pajamas, never doing your hair, taking a shower, and just say, I'm going to work for an hour and then I'm going to sleep on the couch for 6 hours today. I did my one YouTube video this week.
Yeah.
You have to be constantly driven and always looking for what's the next thing I can add to my overall brand or my overall business model, even if you don't do a ton of that work. But I think you made a good point. If a producer calls you to play drums, they know they got a drummer, someone who could probably do some programming. Hey, this dude also does audio editing for podcasting. He also does cool thumbnails, and he could do some YouTube stuff. And I have this artist that I'm working with, and he or she needs some branding makeover on the YouTube channel. Tim did a really cool thing on this thumbnail, which has nothing to do with drumming anymore. But it's all those different connections and all the different tools that you have. So someone could call you, and you could provide them 10 different types of things that you could do to help them for whatever they need beyond just your main thing, which is drumming.
I'm always talking to touring musicians. I'm like, listen, the artist you're out with would never be upset if you had a DSLR camera and you were taking like awesome videos and photos of them while they're on tour. They're never going to be upset at that, as long as you get their permission and you're not being weird about it. Like, they're never going to be upset that their drummer also doubles as a videographer.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
And if we're being honest, a lot of times videographers get paid like quadruple what
the drummer
does to be out on the road doing it.
Right.
So it's like, sure, you don't have to become a full-time videographer and you're like working for HBO on the next season of Game of Thrones or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about you're here, you're drumming, and you say to yourself, like, this was me for tour managing. I was out, the first time I started tour managing, I was out with an artist where they were new artists, they were great, super talented, but very green, brand new to town, and none of them had ever toured, and I was just, at every show, I was like, man, they're trying to do this themselves, and they're getting kind of destroyed because they just don't know, they haven't done it enough to have the experience to know that when you call in advance a show, you're not just like double checking like load-in times and show times. Like, do they have the backline gear?
Right.
Is the catering like set up? Are we good to go on that? Or is it a buyout for lunch? Like, there's so many things that go into a show. So I said, hey, no pressure. Not here how to tell you to do your job, but I've been out and I've thankfully been on the road with some amazing tour managers, and I just kind of looking like, I think your lives would be way easier if you could free up some time to do X, Y, and Z, and you had someone doing this. If you're ever interested in that, let's talk about it. And they were like, whoa, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah, that's really good.
And that's what we're like. I think for a long time I thought to be a successful musician, I want to be a drummer and I want to play drums. And I just looked at it as, if I'm doing something that isn't drumming, I'm not making it. And now the amount of things I do is like endless.
Right.
And it's very hard, like so much so that like when someone at a party is like, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm like, well,
yeah,
I don't really know. What did I do today?
For a living,
well, I edited a thumbnail and I did,
right.
So it's not as easy to quantify like in a concise 7-word answer. Like, it used to be like, oh, I'm a touring drummer, and people would be like, wow, that's amazing. Right. So I definitely lost a lot of sex appeal when now at parties people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I have a website and I have like that whole online thing, and then I also work with like, but I think it's just a matter of, again, providing more value and saying like you're saying, being driven enough to find those spots and say, oh man, you know what I could be doing? I could be doing this a little bit better, and
Absolutely.
I could, I see that you guys are doing this, and it's super cool. I think I could actually help because I do X, Y, and Z, and that would really help you guys out. Like, and it does, you do have to have some amount of drive, and like my producer buddies that make great livings, that can sometimes look way different than what it looks like for me. Mm-hmm. Like some of them are like, I'm very much a work from 6 to 5 every day, get up early, go to bed early because that's me and that's what I have to do. And some of my producer friends are like, man, I roll out of bed at like 1 p.m. and I'm up
work
until
all
like
night,
6 in the morning. And I'm like, okay, well,
yeah.
So it's not that there's like a template where if you're doing this but you do have to have some level of, well, every day I'm going to show up and
do something,
chip away at this.
Right, you got to move the ball down the field, even if you're only moving it a half a yard at a time. But you got to move the ball down the field. You can't not pick up the ball and expect to get a touchdown, right?
And it's not always like just because I work for myself now doesn't mean I'm always having fun. I had to renew my hosting for my website the other day.
Why, that's not fun?
Call, that like 45-minute call to figure out like, to negotiate the price and all that stuff. None of that was like fun. I didn't want to do any of it. So it's not like every day just because you work for yourself, you can wake up and just, it's awesome. And
you're not You're not just drumming all day. You're not just drumming all day. And the other thing about multiple streams of income, and especially at this time, we're recording this podcast in the beginning of June 2020, and everything's going around with the coronavirus. If you're a touring musician, and if only you were a touring musician, you're out of work right now, brother. There's no, and who even knows? I mean, let's hope that, in the next 6 months, this is all going to, but they're saying concerts and venues and shows, those are going to be probably one of the last things to come back where you're not going to put 10,000 people in a room to see a band. Even the local weekend warriors, friends of mine, and just even live sound engineers, anyone that needed to be a part of the live music scene to make a living isn't making a living right now. And what are they all doing? They're all scrambling to learn how to do live stream stuff, and they're learning how to perform online and how do I monetize that. Where someone like yourself who was or could still be on tour playing gigs if you want to, you have built this whole other back end of your business where, okay, that dries up for who knows how long. I'm not starving. Right.
Yeah, and I think that even when, and that goes, that like, sure, maybe you want to make a career change, and that's why you're getting some other skills and you're learning a little bit about video or whatever. But I just think it's always good. I always hated in like school when they were talking about the music business. They were like, you got to diversify your income. And to me, it made it seem as if like, well, you're never going to be able to make a full-time living doing the one thing you want to do. So you got to learn all these other things. And that's not what we're really, that's not how I view it anymore. Like I view it as you walk into Target. If all Target sold were like $800 like sectional sofas, they would not have as many customers as they do.
Right. It's a very niche-y thing. Right.
Yeah, and not everybody is in the market for an $800 sectional or a $4,000 sectional.
Right.
And in the same way, not every artist that I interact with when I'm in Nashville has the budget to pay X amount of dollars to have a drummer on the road. Okay, great. But do you need photos edited? Because that's also something I do. It's not necessarily that like you're not good enough at drums, or you're not good enough at mixing, so that can't be your full-time gig. So like go out and learn how to do this and this and this. That's not really what we're talking about. It's that you are able to serve more customers, if you want to look at it that way.
Yep.
You're able to serve far more customers if you offer more.
Right, more value.
And not everybody wants to do that.
Right.
But it also serves the double purpose. So that's how to have multiple streams of income and probably earn more money. But it also serves the double purpose that when one of those things absolutely tanks because there's a pandemic, which no one could have predicted ever, that you have something else that you can say, oh, well, I've also got this service that I can offer.
Right.
And that's when I look at, like, I really love Aaron Sterling. He's an amazing drummer, session drummer, plays for John Mayer, has played on, like, every album ever. He's got master classes out where he's teaching session stuff, and they're amazing. And I always look at it as, like, if Aaron Sterling, the top call session drummer on planet Earth right now. If he's out there,
You're right. If he's out there
making
courses,
master classes and like releasing sample packs and doing that thing, like it's I should too.
Yeah, right.
I don't get called for as many sessions as Aaron Sterling. You know what I mean? It's like every great, it's LeBron James. Sure, there's a whole nother podcast devoted to whether he's the best basketball player on planet Earth right now, but he's certainly very good at basketball.
Yep.
And you don't see him just saying, you know what? All I want to do is play on this team. I'm not going to worry about business. I'm not going to worry about anything else until I'm done in the NBA. No, not at all. And he's making way more money than I do to be in the NBA. But it's just not, it's just not great to have all your eggs in any one basket. Right. Especially when that basket isn't paying for your health insurance. It's not paying you any kind of benefits. It's just hiring you from a gig-to-gig basis.
Right.
So yeah, there are a lot of my friends who I think it took a moment like this for them to realize, like, I talk to, and I'm sure you do too, I talk to so many people all the time. They're like, man, oh yeah, I've thought about starting a podcast, or man, I got this great idea. And I'm like, man, you should do that. Do it right now while you're not worried about whether it pays you money or you can monetize it or whatever. That's going to be the best time to start it. So. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, because we mentioned about a lot of different things that you do. So give us kind of a synopsis on your website. So you do drum, you do notation, you do courses, you do give us all the things that you do. And again, your link will be in the description box in the show notes below, so you can go check out what Tim does. But what are all the different things that you have going on your website that people can check out?
Yeah, so timbuellmusic.com is kind of where most of me lives on the internet. I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tim Buell, which is bunch of drum stuff, a lot of recording stuff. A lot of it is like drum-specific recording stuff, but that's there, Ableton stuff. I also have a podcast, You're Good, Get Better, which you have been on.
Yep, great podcast.
That is a lot about drums, but it's also a lot about music. And like, I personally love the more philosophical side of life, especially when I'm talking to musicians that I love and who I respect. So we get into all kinds of stuff on that podcast. That's You're Good, Get Better. So if you're looking for free stuff, the YouTube channel, the podcast, great place to start. My Instagram @Tim Buell, put a bunch of drum videos there. And then on my website, if you go to timbuellmusic.com, you can go to, there's like a free lessons, transcriptions tab, and that's more fun drum nerd stuff that you can check out.
And how to transcribe.
Transcriptions, lessons, all that stuff. So as far as the business side of things, so that's just free stuff. You can go to my website and find all that stuff and just check it out. If it helps you, amazing. As far as my business stuff, like I do a lot of transcribing. So transcribing is you hear a drum part and you notate it note for note as it was performed. So I have a lot of people that I have done that for and with. So I've worked with companies like Vic Firth and Zildjian and Stevens Drum Shed and drummers like Ash Sohn and Aaron Spears and so I've done a lot of that. That's my Echo Ring doorbell happening in the background.
Someone's
just
at
for
the door.
anyone hearing that. That wasn't your doorbell, that was mine. I transcribe a lot for myself and put out ebooks and stuff like that, and then I've partnered with a lot of drummers and drum companies to do that. I also have courses for sale, Ableton course, stuff like that. I do a lot of sessions from home, and then I also work with a lot of other content creators, helping them edit video, essentially help them put content onto the internet, whether that's mixing or video editing or photo editing or whatever. I do a lot of that stuff too.
So if someone has music that needs to have drums put on it, they could just contact you through your website too, right? So you're working with some
100%.
big name people, but you're working with indie artists and people who just say, hey, I programmed my easy drummer and I'm not happy with the drums and I want a live drummer, a real drummer to play. You can work with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can actually go to my website, timbuellmusic.com/discography. Very difficult word to say. But it's also in the menu. If you go to timbuellmusic.com, there's a selected discography of stuff that I've worked on the last couple years. So yeah, and like as a as we've been talking about this whole time, the business side is important and all of that stuff. Probably my favorite thing I did in the last 2 years was I put out these solo drum instrumental things that I recorded myself, produced myself, edited myself, mixed myself, did the artwork, did all of it. It was really fun for me to be on the other side. You know, all of the projects I've ever played on in my life, I've played drums on the song, and then
left. Someone else did all the back ends. Right.
Yeah. So the artwork, I've never decided on artwork. All of these kind of steps I've never really done myself, even though I've played on tons and tons and tons of songs. So it was really fun for me to do that, and that's kind of one of those things of, it's fun. So I think that if you are already a creative, whether you're mixing for a living or whatever, that kind of passion project of mine of just putting out solo drum stuff was like definitely time well spent, even though I have made zero money from it.
Right.
And that has done me really nothing in the term of like moving my business forward. It's like the thing I look back on and say, you know what? The like 1,300 people that have streamed that on Spotify,
that's great.
If it was only for them, great.
Right. And that keeps you inspired and motivated to do other things. I mean, you need to do those types of projects to keep the juices kind of flowing and to get away from it's just not the business side and I got to make money. I got to do something for fun, take a break from this. And then I'm going to go back and do those other things that I know I need to do.
Absolutely.
Right? Well, I really do appreciate you so much coming on the podcast. So anyone, again, that wants to check out what Tim does, go to the show notes below. All the links will be there. If you want to learn Ableton, like I said before, go there and get that course. It's money well spent, and you'll learn a hell of a lot more than I could even teach you about Ableton in a short amount of time. And I also think we were talking about you giving us maybe some drum stems of some of those instrumentals that you were talking about. So maybe we can do like a live mixing drums masterclass or something.
Cool.
Would be a lot of fun too. So stay tuned for that. And Tim, thanks so much for coming on. I do really appreciate you taking the time. And if you guys need to know about Tim, go click the links below, check him out, and we will talk to everybody next week on the Home Recording Made Easy podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.